If you've been living under a rock somewhere, you might have missed the big news. Warhammer is about to change forever. Dawn of War Warhammer is here. Last month we saw the beginning of my latest hobby descent into insanity as we began my new project to transport the greatest Warhammer video game of all time to the tabletop. And right now, right this very second, the first episode of our Dawn of War Warhammer campaign kicks off over on our second channel, Zorphammer, dedicated to the gaming side of the campaign. But today, right here on Zorpazorp, we're diving headfirst into the hobby madness of creating a 72 square foot Dawn of War mega board and getting everything we need ready to film Dawn of War Warhammer. Last month we kicked this off as we began preparing our armies, and we uncovered Adam's amazing orc army and set about creating my own glorious blood ravens. They need a little bit more work, but first we're going to focus on their buildings, because as anyone knows who has played Dawn of War, being able to build your base and construct buildings is just as important as the game goes on as amassing your army. Now, I've actually tried to build Space Marine buildings from Dawn of War before, way back in 2008 when I was but a wee lad.
Hey there guys, Games Workshop were a bit boring, so this is really why I'm doing these videos, and there's bloody no inspiration out there at all.
I'm old, Gandalf.
This time around, we've got a lot more tools at our disposal, and I just knew someone must have designed some STL files, and then I stumbled upon a video right here on the old YouTube that got me pretty pumped. Nick and Jay over on Eons of Battle are also massive fans of Dawn of War, and Nicky Boy designed a whole suite of sexy STLs for 3D printing buildings inspired by the game. The lads sent them over to me and I started having a play. If you're keen to print them for yourself, the guys have them as part of their Patreon, which I've linked down in the description. I knew that it would probably be too complex from a gameplay perspective to have every single building option we have in the game available to play in the tabletop version. But it's really important to me that I design this whole game system with the idea that there are some crazy people out there who want to do this too, and if each of the faction has 10 buildings that they can build, it'll be like a huge cost outlay. So for the first rounds of the campaign, we're just going to focus on the key structures. For the Space Marines, I've decided that that was the Stronghold, the Armoury, and the Chapel Barracks from the lads at Eons of Battle, and then I found a couple of other STLs online for a power generator and a machine cult. Now, annoyingly, all of my 3D printers were still in Australia when we were printing these, so I got a couple of mega lads from Christchurch to print some stuff for me, and over a few weeks, I put the terrain project to the side and started working on the blood ravens we saw in the last video. But once the mighty print farms had been hard at work, it was time to jump in the car and pick up some care packages. Now, the buildings that Nick had designed are a hybrid of resin printed details and FDM plastic structures. So Sam smashed out all the FDM prints on his two Prusa Mark IIIs, which were just absolute workhorses who didn't have any misprints at all on this marine stuff, and at Sam's place I got a big old box of plastic.
Thank you, Sam.
No worries.
Woo! Say hi.
Hey.
Hello, puppy. Ooh, 3D prints.
Then it was time to cruise over to Jimmy's, who smashed out all these little resin details on his Elegoo Saturn II. The resin prints needed to be cleaned up, having their supports removed, and then a wash with isopropyl alcohol and a cure in the UV chamber, and then they were ready to go.
Give me the prints, Jimmy. Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
With all the goodies home, I started sorting them into their various piles. I certainly ended up with a little more than I had planned. As Sam and I had kind of coordinated prints, I just kept adding more, especially as I kind of further developed the gameplay system. Matching all the little pieces to each building was a bit wild, so I busted out the instructions and kind of pieced it all together. I ended up with a single Stronghold mech center and armory, 3 power generators, 3 heavy bolter turrets, and 2 chapel barracks. And I also have a bunch of sexy orc themed prints, but we're going to look at those a bit later on, so they're in a box for the time being.
So this is essentially just a massive 3D printed jigsaw. I've got the huge FDM structures, I've got resin printed little details to go on a few key buildings. I've sorted them out, I think, into their kind of piles for each building. I've got to work out how to glue them together, how to clean them up, and how to get them looking awesome so they can all come together for a fantastic Dawn of War landscape.
When you print with FDM, you often get a little bit of stringing from the nozzle, but it's super easy to clean up. You just whack on a mask, grab the flamer, the heavy flamer, and give it a light roast roasting. You want to apply the flame lightly and slowly, turning the piece until the sides go golden brown. You can tell when it's done if you just sort of cut into it and the middle is still pink, then you need to do it a little bit longer. Some of the pieces have had some thicker flash where the prints were mounted to the build plate, which was just sort of needing a nice kind of easy trim with a scalpel to clean up that detail. Our first building on the menu for today though is the Chapel Barracks, and I want to build this in multiple parts so I can do animations of the structure being built in parts just like the video game. So I'm not building it on a base, but that does make it a little kind of tricky from a strength perspective. Our first part is the little drop pod bay doors.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
So I grabbed a cardboard box and started gluing together the little side panels with Gorilla Glue, not worrying that if it sticks down to that cardboard, I'll just rip it off later. And then I dropped in the top piece, which should hopefully kind of make it all nice and rigid and lock it together. While that dries, we'll start on the chapel A-frame, which was a bit tricky to get working. There's a bunch of different panels which sort of bolt onto some central frames. It's really quite self-supporting, so once it dries it should be strong. But getting it to all stay in place with a glue that doesn't set really quickly was a bit of an ask. But I'd been looking for a nice strong glue for FDM prints, and the almighty internet said that Gorilla Glue was a great option. With the central frame in place, I knocked up the second half, building it onto the first, and then stuck a few pieces of bracing tape across it and set it aside to dry. Our second building is a lot less complicated. This is the Machine Cult. Now this STL isn't from Eons of Battle, but something I found online that was designed for a much smaller scale. I scaled it up in my slicer, and then I cut it into 4 different pieces to fit the print bed of the Prusa Mark III, kind of make it as big as we could, and then I glued the pieces together along the seam, and to be honest, I'm not super optimistic about how that join will hold up, but we'll just see how it goes. I then left the little beacon freestanding so that I could move it around during gameplay. The Armoury was an STL file that Nick from Eons of Battle made custom for me, modifying his Chaos Armoury that he'd made as part of the Chaos range, and I mostly left this freestanding so that we could do some cool assembly shots mid-game. I just glued in all of the little antennae on the sides.
Initiated with positive haste.
Next on the bench is 3 power generators. These are super multi-part, with each Jenny having the base, the topper, 4 arms, and 4 kind of power rods. I had to give these a fair bit of cleanup and then kind of assembled them just dry fitting it. I didn't glue anything. That way I can keep the rods separate to make painting easier, and I just chucked them all to the side, ready in queue to go on the painting line. Then our final little small buildings are the 3 heavy bolter turrets. These bad boys just look fantastic, although again, they needed some work with the scalpel to trim off a bunch of flash.
Attacking as ordered.
Then it's time for our centerpiece, the biggest puzzle of them all, the Space Marine Stronghold. Now I actually think I should have scaled this up by probably about 20%. It's a little bit more playable at this scale, but to be honest, I think I wanted it bigger. But I do want to make multiple versions in the future so that I can change the building as it gets upgraded. So maybe this one is sort of nice that it's a bit smaller, as it could be sort of the base one before they kind of upgrade up and get larger. The most exciting thing about this guy though is the FDM structure has all these cool little locking pegs. Good job, Nicky boy. I don't need any glue. It's also fully interioured, so it'd be super fun for normal games if you wanted to make it enterable scenery. But I do need some glue for our first set of resin gribblies. A whole bunch of little details like vents and lights, and all the way up on the top is the little drop pod bay door.
Open the pod bay door.
These were printed by Jimmy in resin just to give it that extra quality where we need it, and these went in with standard super glue, and kaboom! How good is this beast? While all the glue dried, I started doing some paint tests on my heavy bolter turrets and realized once primed, the turret might not move smoothly in the mount, which we need for some sweet firing shots in the battle reports. So I grabbed my magnetization kit from the magnetbaron.com and drilled down into the base of the housing and the turret mount and seated 2 3mm super magnets, and now it swivels perfectly. Now, our Dawn of War rules require a lot of units to be able to change their loadouts during the course of the game. Sergeants can upgrade their chainswords to power swords and even power fists, their bolt pistols to plasma, Marines get new heavy and special weapons.
Light of the Emperor!
And even vehicles have complex loadout options like the Space Marine Predator, which can swap out its autocannon and heavy bolters for mighty las cannons.
Now, I didn't want to have to buy triples of everything to do all of those loadouts, so we got some help from today's sponsor, the almighty Magnet Baron, the official sponsor of the Dawn of War Warhammer campaign, because magnets, they just solve everything.
If you need magnets for your wargaming, then look no further than the magnetbaron.com, your DIY super magnet home. Magnetbaron.com have a huge range of wargaming magnets which are super powerful and even have specific kits for notoriously difficult to magnetize models, magnetize movement trays, and magnetize collapsible flight stands for the epic travel wargaming experience.
I challenge you to find a better feeling in all of wargaming than the pure bliss of this moment. Magnetic perfection.
So to score some boss wargaming magnets for all your army needs, hit up the magnetbaron.com, link down in the description, and a big shout out to Constantine who runs the Magnet Baron. He's an absolute legend. It's not often you'll find a sponsor willing to support content on a brand new channel, so go and show him some love. So that's all pretty sweet, right? Time to start painting. Well, you would think so, wouldn't you? I went back to the first couple of buildings that had started to dry, and I noticed a few issues. The Gorilla Glue is essentially an adhesive foam, so it expands as it dries. Now this is by design because it's meant to be used with materials that are porous or have a substrate that the glue can work into and create a fantastic mechanical bond. But FDM plastic is not porous, so the glue just drives the pieces apart, and worse, it doesn't even stick to them. Now, as I actually have at least a half-started, albeit incomplete background in materials engineering with an interest in composites, you'd think I would have known this wouldn't work, but the internet said it would be fine, and furthermore, it literally says on the bottle, virtually glues anything. Ugh, they got me on a technicality.
So that can off to the bin. Let's see, what do we got? Time to bring out the big guns. Licky nails.
Now, nothing against Gorilla Glue, it just wasn't the right tool for the job, which was immensely frustrating as I should have known better.
Okay, so my plan is to grab my liquid nails and then jam that all through the kind of inside of these joints, try and actually give this damn thing some strength. And then, of course, I need to clean up all of the kind of expanded, gappy, awful joins from the substrate glue pushing out all of the bits and pieces. So, we'll get some filler in there, we'll file that all back, and maybe try and de-wonkify that. Let's see if we can fix this.
Liquid nails shall be my savior, or licky nails, translating from Australian there. I trimmed away as much of the expanding glue flash as I could and reinforced the joins with liquid nails from the inside of the structures, and some things I kind of just had to rip them apart and re-glue them, which hurt to do, but it was worth it in the long run as those buildings are now rock solid. The barracks, however, were definitely the worst affected because they're made from so many pieces, and I just couldn't stomach fully dismantling them, especially as I had very little time. We are like on day 5 or 6 of our 10-day timeline at this point to get ready for this campaign, so I just had to keep going, and where the glue expansion had created gaps, I grabbed some Vallejo plastic putty and kind of filled them in and blended them, and then while I had the putty out, I sort of had a really nice idea to kind of blend a few other joins that I wasn't going to, and that kind of worked really nicely, like the edges of the drop pod bay doors.
Pod bay doors.
Those now looked like they'd been welded together by servitors, so that was a nice little win, and then it was time for the last of the resin details on all the buildings, and those are the lights and the light holders of the chapel barracks. I attached these with super glue, and then once that was dry, flipped it over and did a little bit of liquid nails from underneath just for some extra strength that's a little bit more impact resistant, and then after some serious assembly pain, these are finally ready for paint. Far out.
This is mental. Dawn of War is sitting here on my table. It's grey at the moment though, and it needs to be beautiful blood raven red. I've got 2 little Rust-Oleum cans here. There's like this kind of just black, of course, and then like a red ultra matte. It was kind of the only, I just broke a building, that's great. It was the only kind of red that was matte, that sort of, everything else was gloss. So I don't know if it's the right tone. Let's start whacking it down and having a little go. Oh, hang on, I need a mask. One sec. Wait there. Hey! Alright, let's give it, oh yeah. You guys are not going to be able to hear me now, but that's fine. The amount of Rust-Oleum cans I have broken trying to get the lids off. Nice and, there we go. We're just going to do a little test. Who's our first victim? Ooh, I like that. Okay, Jeez, it's red. All right, we'll give that a sec to dry. That's looking a lot more promising than I thought it was, just based off that little swatch on the lid. Let's let him dry. We'll come back.
As I was pretty happy with the red, I just slapped it down absolutely everywhere. This is my priming layer, so good coverage is important, which can be tricky with buildings that have lots of details and different shapes. I then very carefully hit a few parts in black with the rattle can where I could, sort of trying to minimize overspray onto the red, and I also blasted the door to the Stronghold in a bone white. Then it's airbrush time. There are some super important visual details of these buildings that if we nail just right, we're going to be able to be super lazy with the paint job. Painting Warhammer fast is all about prioritizing where to spend your time so you can take shortcuts elsewhere. And for us, our focus is the hazard stripes. So first up, it's detailing an absolute bunch of areas in black. Anywhere we eventually want hazard stripes obviously needs to be black, but it's also an important layer for just breaking up the blocks of red and defining various details and features like pipes, hatches, vents, etc. Not to mention all of the drop pod bay doors.
Pod bay doors.
On the chapel barracks, I used some masking paper to create a mask for some stripes along the base of the main door, and then waited for all of that black to be completely dry. The wonderful aspect of this layer is that if you apply anything a little bit messily, the overspray kind of barely reads. It's basically just extra shadows splattered around the place. Next, I gave all of the black features a hit of silver with a combination of like dry brushing and overbrushing and sometimes even a little bit of stippling to kind of build up a metallic texture. Then comes the really fierce layer, the hazard stripes. I tried to cheat them a little bit using the airbrush freehand, but absolutely nothing beats the look you get from properly masking. So I cut up lots of little pieces of masking tape, felt like a million of them, and ladies and gentlemen, brace yourself for some ultimate peel porn. The most satisfying hobby experience awaits us. But first, every single building must be masked, and I just ended up going wild here. It's stripes everywhere, right? Every single building, I wanted a little bit of stripes. If I can get it everywhere across all of the pieces in some spot, it's going to make the whole set of scenery feel really cohesive. I then got ready to peel my first test piece, that initial mask on the chapel barracks, and oh boy is this working amazingly. Also, a small apology for the camera work of this next section. I didn't notice I was zoomed in, but it's a pretty authentic moment that I wanted to share with you guys, so just battle through with me, folks.
Okay, it's been a bit of a shitty morning, to be honest. Had kind of a meltdown about a bunch of stuff. There's like 7 days until I'm supposed to be filming, and you know, this scenery is not even happening. I haven't even started painting the Space Marines at this point, which you guys will have already seen in another video. The actual board itself is piles of foam behind me. The Orc terrain is sitting in boxes unbuilt, let alone assembled, primed, orcified, and ready to go. So I'm kind of melting down. On top of that, I just had a bunch of sponsors cancel, and the cost of this build is kind of skyrocketing. I'm running out of time and I'm running out of money. So that's not awesome. Yeah, so that made a bit of a meltdown. I managed to get through it with the help of my beautiful wife and picked up the airbrush, which is always hard, right? The airbrush, I don't know. Where's my bloody airbrush? I have kind of like a mental block on this thing. I don't use it very often, and it's like so scary. And then as soon as I get it out and bust through the pain barrier, I love it so much. The airbrushes are amazing, and they're not that scary. I don't know. I love this thing. Anyway, I've battled my way through, and I have got all of these little hazard stripes done. I've put tape down on all of these buildings. My test piece looks amazing, and it was this moment, that like peel porn of pulling back the tape and seeing that, because this bad boy here, they are like almost filmable. If I can just get these hazard stripes down, all I've got to do is throw down some washers, and these buildings are almost going to be ready to put on the table. And I just feel like I've had a huge win after a really crappy start to the day. So let's bust out the yellow and let's get these guys looking amazing. And then we can see what the kind of next best task to hit is to try and build some momentum into knocking into this project. Because I am just running out of time so hard. But I'm in a good place right now. Let's ride the wave. Let's go.
I ended up experimenting with a few different yellows and also how much I thinned the paint. It really needs to be pretty opaque so that the yellow is going to read over the black base coat without me putting down a million layers, but too thick and of course the airbrush is going to block, so a big juggling act there. Vallejo medium yellow became my weapon of choice, and these stripes just add so much to the scheme because it's peel porn time. Ooh yeah baby, peel it. Yeah, peel it. Peel the tape. Ooh. I just love peeling masks. It looks so sexy. I threw down some cream on the big skull icon on the Cult Mechanicus, and then I started assembling my buildings in their current state to see how we're doing. And it was about now I finally started to feel good about this project. The deadline is still absolutely crushing me, but at last I had something to show for my last 3 weeks' work. There is something here that is usable. There were a few bits of yellow overspray from where the masks had lifted that I needed to clean up, which I did by hand with the brush, and then decided to bring in another neutral color, a kind of light concrete gray that I applied on a few features on each sort of building to kind of break up the regions where the stripes were butting up hard against the red and then bits of black. I gave the front door and the drop pod bay door a nice layer of cream, and then I needed to put down some glowing light effects for the windows on the Stronghold and anywhere we have those little bunker lights. So I hit those with a relatively transparent pass of white, letting overspray kind of hit anywhere that light would naturally fall coming out of the light source. We want the white kind of really quite sort of opaque and bright at the brightest point closest to the center of the light, of course, and then I'm going to use a similar tactic on the inside of the power generators to kind of create like a glow of light diffusing from those rods or those power cells that are inside the generator. I then realized I'd forgotten to do all the yellow on the stripes of the generators, as these kind of have like a raised 3D printed stripe pattern rather than me just doing it with masking. I tried doing it by hand with the airbrush with the yellow, but I needed to clean it up in black anyway, and Bo had just popped over, so Bo got the job of cleaning up the yellow. The power cell rods I'd already sprayed separately with a white primer, so now we are on to something new.
So these are looking so good now. Bo's doing the last little bits and pieces of the hazard stripes on the power cells, and now with the airbrushing finished, there's 2 steps left really. There's the oil wash, which I don't know if we're going to get to, but there's, you know, we've put this white down for all these bits and pieces. Now it's time to make all the colors, the lights and the windows. So we need some contrast paints, which are not in this room actually. Hang on a second. We need this room. All right, here we go. So contrast paints. So we need a brush to start with. Tesseract Glow, this is going to do our kind of power cell energy greeny things, but we need something for our kind of general light, so probably the brightest yellow of the new contrast range, and then I've left my phone in the other room. Hang on, I need to know what these things look like. Here it is, okay. Phone. All right, so I've got here a little photo of the Bloodraven Stronghold. So these window things are like super green. Just gonna stick that in there. Ooh, Hexwraith Flame. The old technical changed to a contrast. I don't know, let's go have an experiment with some of these greens.
I haven't really done glow effects like this since way back when I did my Necrons, which some of you might remember, and maybe we will see my Necrons again soon if this Dawn of War Warhammer campaign really kicks off, but it meant that it took me a bit of a while to work out how to execute it. For the light fittings, I used like a kind of classic bright yellow, right, to make that sort of standard light source, but getting it to be thin enough so that it would read on all of those lightly oversprayed areas to look like light is shining was a little bit tricky. The windows on the Stronghold needed to be green as per the Stronghold from the game, but because they were sort of in these weird spots, getting the contrast to sit nicely on that window layer was also a real challenge. The trickiest of all though was the power generators. First I had to reassemble them, so I drilled out the base of each rod so that it would mount really cleanly to the pegs that were already on the STL, and then once they were all glued and rock solid, I just sort of splashed color everywhere using contrasts. I experimented with blue and green, trying to even make a gradient between the two colors, but it didn't really work, so I sort of just ended up going with that kind of standard bright cool blue, and I think that matches the game pretty closely, sort of like the old plasma look everywhere we see in Warhammer. Now I did hope, of course, to do a bunch of sexy oil washes and weathering, but I just ran out of time. I just had to cut it from the plan, and you know what? These buildings look damn good on the table without them. Maybe they're just brand new off the factory and that's why they're not all dinged up yet. Up next, of course, I still need to do all of the Orc buildings for Bo's Orc army to build during the Dawn of War Warhammer campaign, and then I need to finish my Blood Ravens and build the full 72 square foot Tartus Manufactorum and Portside board. But all of that is going to have to wait until next time. If you want to see these buildings in action, go and check out the first episode of Dawn of War Warhammer. It's on my second channel, Zorphammer. It's linked down in the comments in the description. Would mean so much to me if you check it out. And if you'd like to play Dawn of War Warhammer yourself at home, you can check out the work in progress alpha of the rule set that I've written by supporting me on Patreon. Thanks guys, I'll see you soon.
The Emperor!